Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be exploring something I find really fascinating. China's automotive industry.
Yeah.
And how it became such a global powerhouse.
Right.
You've got a bunch of interesting research and articles here that you shared with me, and I'm really curious to kind of dig into this and see, how they managed to pull this off.
It is remarkable, how China has gone from, being a country that made cars for other companies to suddenly being, a global leader in car innovation, especially with electric vehicles.
Yeah, it's like they had this crystal ball, right?
Yeah.
And saw the future of the auto industry while everyone else was kind of stuck in the past.
Yeah.
And what really gets me is how fast it all happened, right?
Yes.
It seemed like almost overnight, they became this dominant force. Didn't China surpass the U.S. as the world's largest car producer and consumer?
Yes, 2009.
Way back in 2009.
It was a pivotal year. And as of August 2024, they're on track to overtake Japan as the top car exporter.
Wow. So they're not just making a ton of cars.
Right. It's not just about the quantity. They're leading a revolution, especially with those new energy vehicles where they control about half of the global market share.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It sounds like they had a really deliberate strategy to get to this point. Did it all start with that 863 plan that I saw in some of this research?
You're exactly right. Around the year 2000, China launched the 863 plan, which basically made electric vehicles a top national priority. It's amazing how early they saw the potential there.
Yeah, I came across this story about Qian Susan, this renowned scientist who, back in 1992, was already advising China to skip over the combustion engine era entirely.
Right.
It wasn't really feasible back then.
Right.
But it shows how far back their vision for electric vehicles actually goes.
Yeah.
So what were the main things driving this early focus on EVs?
Well, there were two key factors.
Okay.
First, they really wanted to lessen their dependence on oil imports.
Makes sense.
Which made them vulnerable to, global price swings and all those geopolitical tensions.
Right.
The second thing was they saw EVs as a chance to jump ahead in automotive technology, become the leaders instead of always following behind.
Okay, so it was energy security and technological ambition.
Exactly.
All rolled into one.
Yeah.
Which, considering their history of long-term strategic thinking, makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Now, this foresight, did it extend to getting the resources they needed?
It did.
For EV production, too?
Absolutely.
Specifically, I'm thinking of lithium, right?
You got it. They made major investments in lithium mining, both in China and around the world.
Okay.
They got big stakes in countries like Australia, Argentina, Mexico.
Wow.
And the Democratic Republic of Congo.
It sounds like they were thinking several steps ahead, making sure they'd have control over those key EV battery components before things got,
That's right. They were thinking long term. They realized that securing a big chunk of the world's lithium reserves would not only prevent those potential bottlenecks, but also give them a strategic edge in the EV market. But, they didn't stop at just securing the resources.
Oh, so what else did they do?
They also focused on improving lithium battery technology itself. At first they were playing catch up, but eventually they surpassed the companies that were initially leading the pack.
So who were those leading companies early on?
In the early 2010s, it was mostly Japanese and South Korean companies that were the big players in the battery market.
Okay.
But fast forward to 2021, and you've got 6 Chinese battery companies in the global top 10.
Wow.
Giants like CATL and BYD emerged as world leaders, and they even set up factories overseas. Wow.
To integrate themselves into that global supply chain.
It's amazing how quickly they turn the tables.
It is.
Now, speaking of catching up, I read that China made a rather surprising move, inviting Tesla to set up a manufacturing plant in their country.
Yeah.
So what was the thinking behind that?
At first glance, it might seem a little counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Why would you invite a potential competitor?
Exactly.
But it was a very smart strategic move.
Yeah.
Allowing Tesla to establish the first fully foreign-owned car manufacturing venture in China came with a pretty clever condition. Complete parts localization within 3 years.
So they welcomed Tesla.
Yeah.
But they said, you have to share your knowledge and technology.
It was a win-win, at least for a while.
Right.
Tesla got access to this huge market in China.
Right.
And those very efficient manufacturing capabilities, while China got to accelerate its own EV expertise through technology transfer. This move played a big role in the rise of domestic EV companies like BNID. I see. So it was like a calculated move to boost their domestic industry.
Exactly. And the results are pretty clear.
Well, and the results speak for themselves, right?
They do.
Didn't BYD overtake Tesla in EV sales in China by early 2024?
That's right. BYD sales were actually more than double Tesla's in China during the first quarter of 2024. It really shows how quickly those Chinese companies have learned, adapted, and even surpassed some of those established EV players.
That's incredible. And they weren't just, building electric vehicles. They were creating this whole ecosystem around them,
Right.
learning from the best and then innovating on top of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that really stood out in the research was how China used its strength in mobile internet technology to push EV innovation beyond just swapping out
Yeah.
combustion engines for electric ones.
Yeah, that's another key to their success,
Yeah.
They saw the importance of making EVs part of that digital world, creating a seamless, connected experience for the user. Things like satellite navigation, connected car tech,
Right.
autonomous driving capabilities,
Yeah.
5G integration, all that became central to what they were offering.
It's like they hit the traditional automakers with this 1-2 punch.
Yeah, it did.
First, they established that dominance in the EV hardware.
Yes.
And then they combined it with, their booming internet sector.
Yes.
And it just seems like the traditional automakers were really left struggling to keep up.
Yeah. Yeah.
This idea of, electrification and intelligence coming together, it seems like a total game changer.
Absolutely. And of course, we can't forget the huge role of government support in all this. China put in place a very robust policy framework to speed up the adoption of EVs and support domestic companies.
Yes, I saw in the research they had those national dual carbon goals and all sorts of incentives for both producing EVs and for people to actually buy them.
Exactly. It's been a multifaceted and consistent effort from the government, showing a strong commitment to this vision they have for an electric future. They've set national goals for peaking those carbon emissions before 2030 and reaching carbon neutrality before 2060.
Can you break down those dual carbon goals for me a little bit?
Sure. So basically, it's a two-pronged approach to, tackling climate change.
Okay.
The carbon peak goal aims to hit the highest point of those carbon emissions before 2030.
Okay.
And then after that, emissions will steadily decrease.
Okay.
The carbon neutrality goal aims to have a balance between, carbon emissions and removals by 2060.
So it's this big picture plan to reduce their carbon footprint and move towards a more sustainable future.
Right.
And are these goals tied directly to their push for electric vehicles?
They absolutely are. EVs are a big part of their strategy to meet those goals. They've implemented a lot of different policies to encourage people to make and use EVs.
Like what kinds of policies?
Well, for example, there are subsidies for the EV manufacturers, tax breaks for people who buy EVs, and even preferential policies that make it more appealing to own an EV.
Okay.
Like, for example, easier access to license plates and driving privileges in certain cities.
So they really called out all the stops to support this EV revolution.
They did.
It's interesting to see how the Chinese government has been so proactive in shaping, the future of their automotive industry.
Absolutely.
And that level of support from the government has clearly played a major role in their success in this EV market.
It has.
But what about the environment?
Right.
We know that EVs themselves are cleaner than those gas-powered cars.
Yeah.
But what about the electricity that's used to charge all these EVs?
That's a key point. The environmental impact of EVs is directly tied to how that electricity is generated.
So if they're charging these EVs with electricity generated from, coal-fired power plants, it doesn't really solve the problem.
It doesn't.
It just shifts the emissions somewhere else, right?
Exactly. However,
Okay.
and this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
China is also making huge investments in clean energy sources, particularly renewables.
Yeah, I've seen these reports about massive solar farms and wind turbine installations popping up all over China.
Right.
are those connected to their EV strategy?
They definitely are. China's making a real effort to decarbonize its electricity grid by moving away from those fossil fuels and embracing renewables like solar, wind, and even nuclear power, which, has its controversies, but is a low carbon energy source.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as their energy grid gets cleaner, the environmental benefits of this whole EV dominance become even more significant.
Right. It's a synergistic effect.
Yeah.
By promoting EVs and at the same time switching to those cleaner energy sources, they're tackling two major problems.
Reducing their dependence on fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And mitigating climate change.
So it's a win-win for them.
It is, and it doesn't end there. China's EV leadership could have a big impact on another technology that's emerging, self-driving cars.
Oh, that's interesting. How are those two connected?
Well, think about it this way. The more EVs you have out on the roads, the more data you're generating about, driving patterns, road conditions, traffic behavior, and all that data is crucial for fine-tuning the algorithms that power those self-driving systems.
So basically, by having this huge number of EVs already out there, China's essentially created a giant testing ground for autonomous driving tech.
Precisely.
That's amazing. They're gathering all this real-world data that other countries might not have access to.
Exactly. They're gathering enormous amounts of data, which gives them a big advantage in that race to develop autonomous vehicles.
This is incredible. It seems like China's not just changing the automotive industry. They're impacting,
global energy, technology, even the future of transportation as we know it.
Absolutely. And what's even more remarkable is they've done all this in a really short amount of time. It shows their long-term thinking, their strategic planning, and that unwavering dedication to innovation.
It's an amazing story. They've gone from being followers in the car world to becoming the ones leading the way.
It's a great example of what can be accomplished when a country really sets its mind to something and uses its resources to make it happen.
Makes you wonder, what does this all mean for everyone else?
That is the big question, isn't it? We're already seeing established car makers putting a lot of money into developing and making EVs, trying to close that gap.
It's like they've finally woken up and realized they need to adapt quickly. Or risk getting left behind.
Absolutely. The competition is really heating up, which is a good thing, ultimately. It'll probably lead to faster innovation in EV technology and a bigger variety of car models at prices people can afford.
It's definitely an exciting time to be watching all this unfold.
Story that's still unfolding.
Yeah.
And the effects are going to be felt for a long time to come.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that we live in a time of,
Yeah.
unprecedented change. And if we want to be successful, we have to understand these shifts.
This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening.
It has.
We've gone from, looking at the nuts and bolts of China's EV strategy to talking about its impact on the whole world.
Right.
From energy to tech to even geopolitics.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought that the car industry would be at the heart of such a huge transformation?
It just shows how interconnected our world really is.
Yeah.
Something that might seem isolated, like the rise of a particular industry in one country, can ripple out and affect every part of the globe. China's automotive revolution is a perfect example of how one industry can come along. And disrupt everything, reshape the future we're moving towards.
It's a powerful reminder that we need to be paying attention to these trends.
We do.
And adjusting our own strategies accordingly.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most surprising or thought-provoking thing about China's journey in the automotive world?
I think for me, it's the sheer speed and the scale of how they've transformed. In such a short time, they've managed to become global leaders in EV tech and production. They're challenging those long-established companies, and they're reshaping the entire automotive landscape.
It's remarkable.
It is.
The long-term vision they have
Right.
and their commitment to innovation.
It really raises important questions for all of us. What can we learn from this? How can we encourage that same spirit of innovation and strategic thinking in our own industries and countries?
Those are great questions.
Yeah.
They are.
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
It is.
It's not just about, understanding what happened in China. It's about taking those lessons and applying them to our own situations. Whether we're talking about, business or policy or even the choices we make in our own lives.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, not reactive.
Right.
Anticipating those future trends and embracing change instead of resisting it.
Well said. This deep dive has been an incredible journey. We've really gotten into the details of China's automotive revolution, looked at its impact on the world, and I hope we've given our listeners some food for thought.
I think we have.
It's been a pleasure diving into this with you.
Likewise, it's a topic that deserves our attention.
It does.
As it continues to unfold.
Thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive.
Yes.